Upright Mike back here with another video. Today I'm going to be doing a campaign guide for Gaul. We will do a deep dive into the campaign map, look at how to deal with the various factions around you, and also how to build up your settlements. I've also uploaded a step-by-step guide for the first 10 turns as the Gauls on very hard difficulty. So if you want to see the turns being played out, please refer to this guide. Lastly, I have uploaded a unit guide that looks at the different Gaul units and how they fit into different army compositions. Without further ado, let's jump into the campaign map. So this is the Gaul starting position. It feels like quite a big sprawling territory when you start, just because it is very spread out and some of the settlements are quite isolated. You've got one isolated settlement in Spain, 4 settlements in modern day France, and lastly 2 settlements in northern Italy. But the way I like to think about it is that you effectively have 3 starting areas: Spain, modern day France, and Italy. So I'm going to talk about each area individually. I'm also going to turn off the fog of war for this, just so you can see what I'm talking about. So in Italy, the objective is to deal with the Romans as soon as possible. If you let them go unchecked, they'll expand and become quite powerful. And late game Roman infantry units are very difficult to deal with as the Gauls, so you want to deal with them early as opposed to them becoming a problem later on. So as we look down the peninsula then, we can see that there's various Roman factions. We've got the Julii in the north, the Scipii in the middle and in Sicily, and the Brutii in the south. So the first faction that you'll need to deal with in terms of the Romans is the Julii, and I'd waste no time in going for them. They start in a fairly weak position in that they have 2 settlements with small garrisons and a moderately sized army. This army will always go to Segesta, so they leave these 2 settlements quite exposed and vulnerable. So what I would do is, you want to take an army from northern Italy and add units from these 2 towns so that it's a decent sized force, and then head down to Ariminum. You don't need to waste time merging units in this area. I would just take this army straight down and you can reach Ariminum by turn 2, and then the other units will have time to catch up by the time that you assault on turn 3. At the same time as you're moving an army down to Ariminum, you want to take this force, which starts in southern modern day France, and move it through the mountain pass into this general area here. So when you do this, effectively you kind of pin the Romans down. So you've got an army coming down here to take Ariminum, another army coming through this mountain pass to take Segesta, and then once you've taken Segesta and Ariminum, you can then converge your forces to take Arretium and eliminate the Julii. I have uploaded a 10-turn guide playing as the Gauls on very hard difficulty, where I show step by step how to defeat the Julii, and in that video I defeat the Julii in under 10 turns. I think it's turn 9 when I destroy the Julii, so it's definitely possible to deal with them in the early game. Once you have defeated the Julii, you'll only have the Brutii and the Scipii to deal with, and you don't need to prioritize going for Rome because SPQR don't expand. They tend to just sit in Rome, which means that you can take them whenever you want to. In terms of what you want to build, so when you're fighting with the Romans, you can actually deal with the Julii with what you start with in terms of units and what you can recruit. You don't need to upgrade your military units or your military buildings to get better units to deal with the Julii. You can just go with what you've got. So in terms of initial buildings, I would go for economy buildings, such as the land clearance in the port, which give you the biggest marginal increase in gold, and I'd do that in both Batavium and Mediolanum. The good thing about taking or destroying the Julii is that when you take Arretium, this city is very built up in terms of the military buildings. It has a tier 2 barracks and a practice range, so you can use the city to recruit swordsmen, which is the tier 2 infantry unit. Currently there's none of your settlements can recruit swordsmen because you only have the tier 1 muster field in both, but when you take Arretium, because this has a tier 2 barracks, you can recruit the tier 2 swordsmen. So you don't need to prioritize military buildings in these 2 towns. In terms of heading down after that to fight the Brutii and the Scipii, I would recommend building armies of swordsmen and barbarian cavalry. And that's because you can deal with the Julii with what you can currently recruit and what you start with, but by the time you head down to the Brutii and Scipii, it's a bit later on in the game, probably turn 15 or so, once you've consolidated having beaten the Julii. So I'd say at that point you want better forces, and that's why I would start building units or building armies of the swordsmen and the barbarian cavalry. So I say that for a few reasons. Obviously when you come down it will be later, but the Romans tend to field armies which are quite numerous in infantry, sword infantry specifically, and so having armies of barbarian cavalry will do very well against the infantry. And don't worry about the cost of the cavalry, because the barbarian cavalry, as we can see here, is only 90 denarii per turn and 400 gold to recruit, so the upkeep cost is actually less than half of what it is for the infantry unit, and the upfront cost is about the same. The reason I recommend going for the swordsmen alongside the barbarian cavalry is that the Romans have one answer to the cavalry, which is the Triarii. It's a spear unit, an early game spear unit that the Romans have, and the swords generally tend to beat spears, so that's why I would have the swords. The swordsmen also have much better morale than the tier 1 infantry, being the warband. If you look at the warband here, it has morale of 4, being a typical early game unit, so it does break quite easily. When you're able to recruit the swordsmen, they have morale of 8 and slightly better defense of 12 and better melee attack of 10. So because you have better troops and they won't break as easily, you'll have a much easier time when you're fighting the Brutii and the Scipii. In terms of other things to consider for this region then, you do start with a spy. I would encourage you to use the spy sort of around this area just to keep an eye on what the Romans are doing. There's various ambush areas where you wouldn't be able to see Roman forces, such as here. So just keep the spy about so that you can keep an eye on what the Romans are doing. In terms of SPQR, I've noted in some campaigns I've done, they will reinforce various factions. So sometimes when you go for Retium, the SPQR will bring up a force to reinforce the Julii. And just bear in mind that the force they bring up is quite good. It usually has about 4 generals in it, which are elite tier cavalry. So when you go for a Retium, when you've taken Segesta and Ariminum and you go for a Retium, just try and make sure that your force is as big as it can be, as healthy as it can be, and not depleted, so that it's effectively a full stack, and you should still be able to beat the SPQR force. Last things then, so towards the east there's a lot of rebel settlements, so you're not really under any threat from anything coming through. I mean, you don't tend to get attacked from this area, and it's a sort of similar story in terms of Mediolanum, in that while Germany are to your north, they are quite far away, so I wouldn't expect any early attacks in Mediolanum and Patavium. So you don't need to build defensive walls. I would just prioritize the economy buildings, and you can use Arretium to be your military recruiting settlement once you take that. So I think that's it for this area. Effectively, you're just going for the Romans as soon as possible. You can take the Julii within the first 10 turns, and please refer to my guide in terms of how to do this, and then following that you want to head down to deal with the Scipii and the Brutii with your armies of swordsmen and barbarian cavalry. Just note then that you will need to build the stables somewhere to be able to recruit those barbarian cavalry, and you can do that in, I would say the best place is either Patavium or Arretium. So now we're going to move on to the next area, which is modern day France. So we start with 4 settlements here. The biggest thing to deal with in this area is the Britannia faction, which start with Samurai Breva. So we want to sort of eliminate them off the mainland so that we can isolate them back in the British Isles. The Britannia faction are quite difficult to deal with in the early game because they have chariots and there's no obvious answer in the Gaul roster. So the best way I find to deal with it is basically to use swordsmen, and in order to recruit the swordsmen we need to build a meeting hall. So meeting hall is a tier 2 structure, and the only tier 2 town you have in modern day France is Alessia. The rest of these are tier 1, so Alessia is the only place where you can build this meeting hall. So I would just go for this straight away and start recruiting armies of swordsmen, because the sooner you can send an army up to take Samurai Brever, the quicker that you can eliminate Britannia from the mainland. We want to eliminate them as soon as possible so that we're not having to deal with Germania and Britannia at the same time. If you let Britannia get a foothold on the mainland, then it's going to be quite tricky to deal with them both. Britannia do usually attack Condate Redurnum first, so I'd encourage building up a garrison here and also building a wall at some point. Condate Redurnum doesn't have a wall, which means that if a enemy force attacks it, they don't need to spend a turn laying siege and building siege equipment, they can just attack straight away. So building a wall will basically just buy you a turn of time to be able to reinforce it. In terms of these two settlements here, Lamunum and Narbo Martius, these are not in any immediate danger, so you can just build economy buildings here. You don't need to build a garrison or build a wall or anything like that. They're safe from danger. So I think that does it for this area. I would also just encourage you to make use of this boat. So if you move this boat along the coast, you can see any reinforcements that the Britannia faction are bringing over, and also any armies that are coming down towards Condate Redurnum. So it's just quite a good idea to have the boat stationed somewhere along this coast so you can keep an eye on what's coming along. Sometimes the British do send quite a big force to Condate Redurnum, and they leave Samurai Brever exposed, so you want to make sure that you have your army ready to close in on Samurai Brever if they do that. So I think that's everything for this area. Next I'm going to move on to the last area, which is modern day Spain. So this settlement is quite isolated. It's very far away from your other settlements, and you also have the Spanish in between you and your settlements in modern day France. I would say in Spain you basically just want to try and sit tight and not engage in any wars. You'll already be fighting, it's likely you'll be fighting the Romans in Italy, Britannia or Germania in the north, so you don't want to have a third frontier, as it were. So I wouldn't invest too much in terms of resources here. You want to invest your resources primarily in dealing with the Romans, second dealing with Britannia, and then this would be the least priority in terms of spending your resources. After you have dealt with the Britons in the north, you can move your forces down to attack Spain and sort of unite your territories. Or you could also alternatively head east to deal with Germania. But I think that kind of covers most of the areas in terms of what you want to do in your different areas. So just dealing with the Romans as soon as you can, dealing with Britannia in the north, and sort of sitting tight in Spain. In terms of just other general points for the Gauls, because the Gauls have such a big starting territory, you can actually sell your map information for gold. So when you're, sending your diplomat around to negotiate with other factions, you want to try and sell that map information to give you a short-term gold boost. Another thing is that when you are conquering settlements such as Samurai Brever or Ariminum, Arretium, etc., I would recommend exterminating them, just because the short-term boost you get in gold and what that allows you to buy in terms of military units and buildings is more than worth the drop in the population later in the game. So I would encourage you to exterminate when you take settlements with the Gauls, because the boost in gold will really help you. So I think that's it for the guide. I think I've covered everything that I wanted to, and I hope you found this helpful. If you enjoyed the content, please subscribe and also leave some feedback. I'm always looking for feedback. So thanks for watching.